Service teardown. HP ProDesk 400 G5 SFF desktop PC. How to replace the access panel. Before you begin, remember to detach all cables that connect to the PC. Whenever working on internal components, use an anti-static mat. Wear an ESD wrist strap attached to the PC when working with sensitive components that are inside the PC to avoid damaging them. Make sure to ground the chassis to the mat. Removal. Loosen the thumb screw at the rear of the access panel. Grasp the handle on the rear of the access panel and pull slightly to the rear before pulling up on the back of the access panel. Remove the access panel from the unit. Replacement. The access panel has several tabs on its side and leading edges, which fit into slots and under the front lip of the PC. There is also a small slot on the rear of the access panel that a lock slot on the PC slides into. To reattach the access panel, align the tabs on the access panel over the corresponding slots on the PC. Slide the access panel forward until the lock slot at the rear of the PC is fully through the small slot on the rear of the access panel. Tighten the thumb screw to secure the access panel to the unit. How to replace the optical drive. Before you begin, remove the access panel. Removal. Detach the power and data cables from the optical drive. Press on the green drive release latch at the rear of the drive and slide the drive out at the front of the unit. If you are installing a new optical drive, pull the green drive release latch off of the optical drive. Insert a straightened paper clip or other similar tool into the force eject hole on the optical drive to eject the drive tray. Pry and push out on the tabs securing the bezel to the optical drive, and remove the bezel from the drive. Replacement. If you are installing a new optical drive, the optical drive bezel has several tabs that fit into slots on the front of the optical drive. Press the old optical drive bezel onto the optical drive until the tabs are secured. There are two small pins on the green drive release latch that fit into two small holes on the side of the optical drive. Press the latch pins into their holes to secure the latch to the new optical drive. Slide the optical drive into its drive bay through the front of the PC until the green release latch snaps into place. Replace the power and data cables to the rear of the optical drive. How to replace the expansion card. Before you begin, remove the access panel. Removal. Lift the latch for the expansion card's retaining bracket and swing the bracket out. Press down on the latch for the PCI x 16 slot on the motherboard if removing a card from the PCI x 16 slot. Carefully pull out the expansion card. Replacement. To replace an expansion card, carefully align and push the card into its slot on the motherboard until it is fully seated. Rotate the expansion card's retaining bracket back into place to secure the card. How to replace the front bezel dust filter bezel. Before you begin, remove the access panel. Removal. Unlatch the 4 top tabs of the front bezel and rotate the front bezel away from the PC. Some units will have a dust filter bezel attached to the main bezel. To replace the main bezel or the dust filter bezel in these units, pry the 2 bezels apart until they separate. Remove the front bezel from the unit. Replacement. If installing a new dust filter bezel, press and snap the dust filter bezel onto the main bezel until all edges on the bezels are flush. The front bezel has 4 tabs with cutouts on the top that fit over small metal tabs on the PC. The front bezel also has 4 tabs on the bottom that fit into slots on the PC. To replace the front bezel, align the tabs on the bottom side of the front bezel into their slots on the PC. Then rotate the top of the front bezel into position until the cutout tabs have snapped into place. How to replace the drives cage. Before you begin, remove the access panel and the front bezel. Removal. Detach the connectors from the hard drive and the optical drive in the drives cage. Press in on the side latch for the drives cage. Swing up the left side of the drives cage, feeding the hard drive connectors down through their access hole on the drives cage. Lift the right side of the drives cage off of the unit. Replacement. The drives cage has a large and small tab on the right side that fit into slots on the PC. The drives cage also has a tab and a latch on the left side that fit into a slot and over a tab on the left side of the PC. To replace the drives cage, insert the tabs on the right side of the drives cage into their slots. Swing the left side of the drives cage down, pulling the hard drive connectors up through their access hole until the latch on the left side fits over its tab. Replace the connectors to the hard drive and optical drive. How to replace the hard disk drive. Before you begin, remove the access panel, the front bezel, and the drives cage. Note, the power and data connectors are removed from the hard drive as part of the drives cage removal. Removal. Detach the 4 Torx T15 screws, securing the hard drive to the drives cage. Note, the screws are in different locations for 3.5-inch and 2.5-inch hard drives. Slide the hard drive out of the drives cage. Replacement. To install a new 3.5-inch hard drive, slide the hard drive spindle side up into the drives cage until the screw holes on the hard drive align with the screw holes marked A on the drives cage. Secure the 3.5-inch hard drive to the drives cage with 4 Torx T15 6x32 screws. To install a new 2.5-inch hard drive, slide the hard drive into the drive cage until the screw holes on the hard drive align with the screw holes marked B on the drive's cage. Secure the 2.5-inch hard drive to the drive's cage with 4 Torx T15 M3 screws. Note, the two types of Torx T15 screws used for the two sizes of hard drives are different. The types of screw required for each size of hard drive are stenciled on the drive's cage. 3.5-inch drive, 6x32 screws. 2.5-inch drive, M3 screws. How to replace the system memory. Before you begin, remove the access panel, the front bezel, and the drive's cage. Removal. Simultaneously push down on the clips on either side of the DDR4 DIMM socket to release the memory module. Carefully pull the memory module out of the unit. Replacement. There is one notch on the bottom of every DDR4 DIMM module, offset from the center, which fits over a tab in the DDR4 DIMM memory socket. When installing DDR4 DIMMs, align the notch on the module with the tab in the socket. Press the module into the socket until the clips on both sides of the socket lock into place. How to replace the wireless LAN board. Before you begin, remove the access panel, the front bezel, and the drive's cage. Removal. Carefully snap off the antenna connectors from the wireless LAN board. Detach the Phillips No. 1 screw, securing the wireless LAN board in place. The board will pop up. Remove the board from its motherboard socket. Replacement. The wireless LAN board has a notch offset from the center that aligns over a key in its motherboard socket. To replace the wireless LAN board, angle the board into its motherboard socket at a 30-degree angle and press down. Hold it down while replacing the Phillips No. 1 screw to secure it to the motherboard. Replace the antenna connectors to the board. The antenna connectors are labeled 1 and 2 and should be connected to the corresponding 1 and 2 labeled ports on the wireless LAN board. Note, the front antenna is antenna 2 and the rear antenna is antenna 1. How to replace the solid-state drive. Before you begin, remove the access panel, the front bezel, and the drive's cage. Removal. Detach the Phillips No. 1 screw, securing the solid-state drive in place. The drive will pop up. Carefully pull the solid-state drive out of the system board socket. Replacement. The solid-state drive has a notch on its edge that aligns over a key in its system board socket. To replace the solid-state drive, angle the drive into its system board socket at a 30-degree angle, engaging the notch over its socket key, and press the drive down. Hold it down while replacing the Phillips No. 1 screw to secure the drive in the unit. How to replace the fan duct. Before you begin, remove the access panel, the front bezel, and the drive's cage. Removal. Free the power supply connector from the cable guides on the side and top of the fan duct. Pull out on the two retaining tabs for the fan duct and pull the fan duct out of the PC. Replacement. There are two small ledges on the inside of the fan duct that rest under the top edge of the heatsink. To replace the fan duct, align the fan duct approximately into place. Pull out on the retaining tabs for the fan duct and press the fan duct down until the tabs snap into place over the edge of the heatsink. Replace the power supply connector through the cable guides on the side and top of the fan duct. How to replace the PS2 and serial port module. Before you begin, remove the access panel. Removal. Lift the latch for the expansion card's retaining bracket and swing the bracket out. Detach the connector for the PS2 and serial port module from the motherboard. Remove the PS2 and serial port module. Replacement. Align the slot edge at the back of the PS2 and serial port module into its position at the rear of the unit. Reattach the connector for the PS2 and serial port module to the motherboard. Rotate the expansion card's retaining bracket back into place to secure the PS2 and serial port module. How to replace the heatsink. Before you begin, remove the access panel, the front bezel, the drives cage, and the fan duct. Removal. Detach the heatsink connector from the motherboard. Loosen the 4 captured Torx T15 screws for the heatsink. Gently pull the heatsink out of the PC. Replacement. Before replacing the heatsink into the system, first, clean off the old thermal grease from the microprocessor. Clean the grease from the heatsink if you are replacing the same heatsink into the system. Apply new thermal grease or pad to the microprocessor. Align the 4 screws of the heatsink over the 4 screw holes on the motherboard, with the connector aligned toward the top of the unit. Tighten the 4 Torx T15 heatsink screws. Replace the heatsink connector to the motherboard. How to replace the CPU. Before you begin, remove the access panel, the front bezel, the drives cage, the fan duct, and the heatsink. Removal. Press down to release the CPU load lever from its retention tab and pull it back. Lift the load plate off the socket. Identify pin 1 on the socket by the mark on the corner of the socket stencil. Carefully remove the CPU from the socket. Place the CPU in an anti-static bag. Note: use of an Intel CPU removal replacement tool is recommended for all regions and required in some regions. Replacement. To replace the CPU, first identify the pin 1 position on the microprocessor by noting the yellow mark on the corner of the chip assembly. Identify pin 1 on the socket on the motherboard by the mark on the corner of the socket stencil. Align the yellow mark on the corner of the CPU chip assembly with the mark on the corner of the socket stencil on the motherboard. Carefully place the CPU into the socket on the motherboard. Swing the load plate down. Lock the load lever under its retaining tab to secure the microprocessor in place. How to replace the power supply. Before you begin, remove the access panel, the front bezel, and the drives cage. Removal. Free the power supply connector from the guides on the fan duct. Detach all power supply connectors from the motherboard. Detach the 4 Torx T15 screws that connect the power supply to the PC. Press the latch at the inside edge of the power supply in the unit and slide the power supply into the PC before fully removing it from the unit. Replacement. There is a slot on the side of the power supply that slides over a large tab on the sidewall of the chassis. To replace the power supply, align the power supply slot slightly behind the chassis tab. Then slide the power supply back until it locks into place next to the latch. Reattach the 4 Torx T15 screws at the rear of the chassis to secure the power supply to the chassis. Reconnect all power connectors to the motherboard. Secure the far side power connector into its guides on the fan duct. How to replace the SD card reader. Before you begin, remove the access panel, the front bezel, and the drives cage. Removal. Detach the SD card reader connector from the motherboard. Remove the Torx T15 screw that secures the SD card reader to the front of the unit. Remove the SD card reader. Replacement. Note, there are 2 locator pegs on the SD card reader that fit into small holes at the front of the chassis. Align the 2 locator pegs with the small holes and insert the pegs into their holes on the unit. Replace the Torx T15 screw to secure the SD card reader to the front of the unit. Reattach the SD card reader connector to the motherboard. How to replace the speakers. Before you begin, remove the access panel, the front bezel, and the drives cage. Removal. Detach the speaker connector from the motherboard. Free the speaker connector from the cable guide on the bottom of the PC. Remove the 2 P1 Phillips head screws at the front of the PC that secure the speaker to the PC. Slide the speaker to the side and pull the speaker out of the unit. Replacement. There are small metal guides on the front inside of the PC for correct alignment of the speaker. To replace the speaker, slide the speaker into its guides, aligning the screw hole on the speaker with the screw hole on the chassis. Replace the 2 P1 Phillips head screws at the front of the PC to secure the speaker to the PC. Reconnect the speaker to the motherboard. How to replace the wireless LAN antennas. Before you begin, remove the access panel, the front bezel, and the drives cage. Removal. Carefully disconnect the wireless LAN antenna cables from the wireless LAN board. Remove the rear antenna cable from its cable guides on the front EMI bracket. Remove the rear antenna cable from the small cable tunnel next to the motherboard. Remove the rear antenna cable from the cable guide on the inside rear wall of the unit. Squeeze the bottom side tabs of the rear antenna cover tab to release the bottom of the cover and pull the cover off of the unit. Detach the Phillips No. 1 screw that secures the rear antenna to the unit. Pry the antenna off the rear of the unit and pull its cable out through its access hole at the rear of the unit. Remove the front antenna cable from its cable guide on the inside front wall of the unit. Pull the front antenna cable out to the front of the unit through its access hole. Detach the Phillips No. 1 screw that secures the front antenna to the unit. Pry the front antenna off of the unit. Replacement. Each antenna has a small hole that fits over a small locator peg on the front and rear of the unit. To replace the front antenna, align the hole on the antenna over its alignment peg and press the antenna adhesive onto the chassis. Replace the Phillips No. 1 screw to secure the front antenna to the unit. Pass the front antenna cable back into the unit through its access hole. Route the front antenna cable back into the cable guide on the inside front wall of the unit. Feed the rear antenna cable in through its access hole at the rear of the unit. Align the rear antenna hole over its peg and press onto the chassis. Replace the Phillips No. 1 screw to secure the rear antenna to the unit. The rear antenna cover has one small tab on the bottom side, two small hook tabs on the top side, and two tabs on the sides that fit into slots on the rear of the unit. To replace the cover, insert the two top tabs into their slots. Then press the sides of the cover until the side tabs have snapped into place. Replace the rear antenna cable into the cable guide on the rear inside wall of the unit. Replace the rear antenna cable into the small cable tunnel next to the motherboard. Replace the rear antenna cable into its cable guides on the front EMI bracket. Replace the antenna cables to the wireless LAN board. The antenna connectors are labeled 1 and 2 and should be connected to the corresponding 1 and 2 labeled ports on the wireless LAN board. Note, the front antenna is antenna 2 and the rear antenna is antenna 1. How to replace the front EMI bracket. Before you begin, remove the access panel, the front bezel, and the drives cage. Removal. Detach the front, number 2, antenna connector from the wireless LAN board. Disengage the front antenna cable from the cable guides on the front EMI bracket. Slide the bracket up and remove it from the unit. Replacement. The front EMI bracket has two tabs, one on each side, which slide into small slots on the chassis. To replace the front EMI bracket, slide the bracket straight down until the tabs are inserted into their sockets. Route the front antenna cable back into the cable guides on the front EMI bracket. Reconnect the front antenna cable to the wireless LAN board. How to restore CMOS to factory settings. Before you begin, restore the CMOS factory settings first, before replacing the system motherboard. To do so, first remove the access panel. Procedure. Remove the battery from the motherboard. Wait 30 seconds. Replace the battery to the motherboard. CMOS factory settings are now reset. Note: you will now need to enter System BIOS and reset the clock in BIOS after this procedure. How to replace the motherboard. Before you begin, remove the access panel, the front bezel, the drives cage, and the fan duct. Remove any expansion cards or the PS2 and serial port module if installed in the unit. Remove system memory, the wireless LAN board, the SD card reader if installed in the unit, the front EMI bracket, the heatsink, and the CPU. Removal. When removing the CPU, install a socket cover on the load plate window before replacing the load plate over the socket. Detach all remaining system connectors from the motherboard. Remove the 8 Torx T15 screws that attach the motherboard to the PC. Tip the front edge of the motherboard up and carefully pull the motherboard out of the unit. Place the motherboard in an anti-static bag. Replacement. To replace the motherboard, carefully tip the rear edge of the motherboard into the unit. Clear connectors away from the edge of the board as you press the motherboard down into place. Replace the 8 Torx T15 screws to secure the motherboard to the unit. Replace all connectors to the motherboard.